Namaste. Today we are inviting Brannon Parker, our guest speaker, and the topic for today is flooding the zone, truth in the age of untruth. So welcome, Brannon Parker ji. Namaste.
Namaste. Very honored and happy to be here.
Thank you very much for joining us. And we will go through. I'll just give a brief introduction to Brannon Parker ji. He's also called as Vrindavan. He's been with the Vedic Friends Association from inception, from last 20 years. So Brannon Parker is a researcher and author of books, of 3 books actually. He has written many featured articles in various magazines. He was born in Atlanta and he grew up in Zambia, Africa, and also he lives in Seattle. As a child, he spent 10 years in Vrindavan in the Sanskrit school, where he has learned about Hindi, Sanskrit, and all the Vedic literature under the guidance of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And he got his Harinam Diksha at that time. At 18 years age, he moved back to Hawaii and he started doing the Gayatri Mantra under Bhakti Sundar Govinda Maharaj. So here we have Brannon ji, and he is author of the book called as Serpent, Eagle, Lion, and the Disc. Maybe he can mention that in his discussion. And then I think I'll leave it to you, Vrindavan ji. We can call him Vrindavan or Brannon Parker. From here, take on. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you for that introduction. Yes, so yes, I was born Brannon, and then at 6 years old, I got the name Vrindavan. And then when I was 10 years old, I got initiated, Harinam Diksha initiation from Srila Prabhupada, and they kept my name. So I'm very grateful because that name Vrindavan, for the Vaishnavas, we know it is like the epicenter of Krishna's Leela, his pastimes here on earth. It's the place where God goes to forget he's God, basically, and he enjoys all the experiences of love and family and friendship and adventures and everything. And as a child, I remember even as 4 years old, looking at those Krishna, I couldn't even read yet, just looking at those pictures, and somehow I was able to just sense, Krishna within them. So it was great. So basically, first, before I say anything, I would like to offer my respects to my spiritual master and the line of spiritual masters, Srila Prabhupada, Bhakti Sundar Govinda Maharaj, the whole Sampradaya, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And basically, if there is anything noteworthy that I do share, it is their mercy. And if there are any deficits in what I'm sharing, that's on me. But Krishna, he says in the Bhagavad Gita, he carries what we lack. And so, if he so desires, may my words resonate with anyone who listens or watches this. And to start off this topic, the name of my presentation, Flooding the Zone, Truth in the Age of Untruth. So what do I mean by that exactly? Well, first of all, flooding the zone is actually a term used by intelligence agencies in information warfare tactics and techniques, where they put out so much information. They literally flood the zone with so much mistruth, actual truth, innuendos, that the very truth itself actually drowns in the flood of too much information. And it's just out there, right? And it's flooded. And so it's like a tactic. Instead of directly attacking the truth, they just like flood the zone literally. And so your average person's just overwhelmed, doesn't have time to ascertain truth from mistruth, from half-truths like that. And so as we know, in this age of Kali Yuga, the last leg of Dharma, of the bull of Dharma, as they say, is truthfulness, Satyam. And the motto of India even today is Satyameva Jayate. Truth is always triumphant. And so a lot of times we can hear things like that and it sounds poetic, it sounds classical, whatever. But it's beyond that. The reason it has potency is because it's truth. because it's actually a fact that if you trace truth throughout history, you will find it's never extinguished. But the issue is, as human beings locked into the prism of the time continuum, so for us, yes, we can be denied access to the truth, but still the truth is the truth and does not die. And so looking at history, there are actually several prominent examples of where the effort to suppress truth actually in the long run reinforced the truth. And one of the most famous examples of this is in the ancient Egyptian episode of the reign of King Akhenaten, Pharaoh Akhenaten. And the fact is if anyone knows about him, they say he's the history's first monotheist and all this stuff. But actually great scholars like Subhash Kak, David Sherman, and also my research has proven that he didn't invent monotheism. He basically was reviving the original traditions of Egypt, which were worship of one supreme God. And he called himself like an Akhenaten, the worshiper of the one. Right. And so he started a whole new revolution based on this concept. And they claim he's a solar sun worshiper and all that. But actually, if you compare his prayers and actually take the research of Dr. Subhash Kak, K-A-K, and he compares like the Vedic prayers, I think the Gayatri with the prayers of Akhenaten, so-called to the sun. And as we know, the Gayatri Savita is connected. And it's almost an exact match. So the idea that he was inventing it is, to put it bluntly, nonsense, doesn't match the historical record. And so he was, even though he was the most powerful man in Egypt, one of those powerful kingdoms on the planet at the time, so it's no exaggeration to say he was probably one of the most powerful people on earth, but he was bucking the trend, the entrenched so-called religion of ancient Egypt, what we would call from the Vedic understanding, the smarta Brahmanism of Egypt in the negative sense, where people are so caught up in the letter of the law, the rules and the regulations, that they actually damage the ability of the practitioners to participate in devotional services. And it actually is a hindrance to developing one's relationship with God, the personal relationship with God, with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So even though he was so powerful, Akhenaten had to flee his own king city, and he had to go in the middle of the desert and build a whole new city. And he started a whole new so-called religious movement. And they find all this artwork and all these texts and all these amazing prayers and all these amazing sculptures. And just to give you an example of the untruth involved, so sometimes they'll find inscriptions and carvings and paintings of Akhenaten and his queen, and they'll show people bowing, right? And then they'll say, look at this guy, he's a total megalomaniac. And that's another interesting thing. Here we are 3,300 plus years later, and they're still attacking the integrity and credibility of Akhenaten. Why? Because he was a dedicated devotee of the personality of Godhead. And they say, look at this megalomaniac forcing everyone to bow to him. But from a Vedic perspective, as someone who obviously had an understanding of Krishna from the Bhagavad Gita, where he says, of humans, of men, I am the monarch. Of animals, I am the beast. Of the Vasus, I am Agni, fire. Of aquatic creatures, I am the shark. So everything Krishna says in those I am verses, you'll find is worshipped everywhere in the world. And so basically instead of a megalomaniac forcing everyone to bow to him, it was a display of Vedic culture, of the people recognizing the king, the pharaoh, and his queen as authentic representatives of God worthy of bowing. And so that's just one example. And so how do we know anything about Akhenaten? How do we know anything about his history? How do we know anything about his beliefs, his prayers? Because after he passed away, the animosity against him was so severe and so great that they spent decades trying to erase every hint of his existence. They erased him from the names of the pharaohs. They erased his existence from the planet. And one of the techniques they did to erase his legacy was they took all his prayers, all his carvings, all his inscriptions, and they used them to rebuild new temples, new palaces. And so, of course, all his Akhenaten related inscriptions were reversed, so no one would ever see them again. Yet lo and behold, what happens as the centuries go by, as the millenniums go by, all the fronts that were exposed to the weather and the sun pretty much were obliterated. And then when everything crumbled and the archaeologists came along 100+ years ago, what do they find? They only find Akhenaten's teachings, Akhenaten's legacy. And so the fact is, if it wasn't for the attempt to destroy his legacy, we might not even have his legacy today, because the weather would have erased it, like so many other things that have been lost. And so this is a primary. Yeah, what? Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. You continue.
Okay, so this is a primary example of within the history record when the suppression of truth actually led to the revelation and the preservation and the later revelation of historic truths. And so it's so powerful, the legacy of Akhenaten, that there are theories going around that, oh, Moses actually took the teachings of Akhenaten and invented Judaism, which I don't believe, but it just shows the impact of Akhenaten, whose legacy had been erased, intentionally erased. It was a direct effort to erase the truth, and then it came back. And then what is the most glorious discovery in the history of archaeology, even to this day? Undoubtedly, the discovery of the tomb of King Tutankhamun. Who is King Tut? King Tut is the son of Akhenaten. And so again, how did they find this minor king's tomb? He lived to I think he was king for 8 years. He was murdered, it looks like. And he had physically, politically, he was impotent, King Tut. After his dad, because his real name was Tutankhaten, his father named him after Aten. And they forced him to change his name back to Tutankhamun. And so they attempted to erase him. And so because he was such a minor figure, they gave him a very minor burial in a very indescript, unglorious, totally the opposite of prominence. But it was those very things to minimize him that allowed the preservation of his tomb. To this day, there's been nothing as grand that has been highlighted as much in the history of archaeology as King Tut's tomb. So again, this effort to minimize the son of Akhenaten actually led to the glorification and the highlighting of Akhenaten as the greatest golden emperor of Egypt. And so, and again, it directly reflected onto his father and added to the glory and legacy of Akhenaten. So that's a good example. And then if we go to ancient China, we find they're having these book burnings of all these different religious doctrines. And what happened was because the Chinese managed to keep so many records, the actual whole that was developed by these attempts to crush and erase truth was so obvious to later researchers that now there's a great field of study. I can't remember the exact term, but it's like a Chinese poetic phrase for revealing the missing shadows in our history. So again, because of the destruction of those ancient Chinese books, it's clued scholars and authentic, honest researchers to locate that destroyed information. And I think the same thing happened to Japan as well. So again and again through history, we see this effect. But of course, I'm not going to deny people, let's say people who are amazed by King Akhenaten's teachings. Yes, they were denied that for thousands of years, but God is the Lord of time. Krishna says, time I am. And so it's all in his hands. But either way, truth is never destroyed. And so in conclusion to that point, it's obvious that the efforts to destroy the truth ended up preserving the truth. And let's see. So going to the personal level. All right. So in my own walk, and I'm sure a lot of spiritual seekers can relate to this, we have, in my own life, I find, why am I even sitting here? How did I even connect with Sri Vijay Vishwaganapaji and Balabhadra Prabhuji and VFA? Well, it was 1995. I was in college, and I specifically chose a professor named Krishna, and from my history professor. and everything's fine. We're going through the textbooks, and then we get to Hinduism, and just like one fallacy and inaccuracy after the other, one thing after the other. And like the first one, you're like, okay, it's a deep subject. Maybe, you know, it was difficult for them. And, you know, but then it was just getting too ridiculous, to the point that I went to my professor, it was a lady professor, and I said, Professor Krishna, we both know this is completely wrong information. And why are we learning this? You know, this is our culture, and it's beyond incorrect. It's false, you know? And my teacher just said, I sympathize with you, but you will be graded by what's in the books. And I says, not by what the facts are. And she said, yeah, I apologize. And so that blatant disregard of the truth for what was a personal experience for me, having grown up from 4 to 14 years old in Vedic culture in the Gurukul system, and being in a college system, you know, like an American university system, where they were teaching outright fallacies about a tradition that I grew up with, was just unbearable to me. So that was actually my first motivation towards seeking the truth. And again, so in my personal walk, I found that attempt to blur and bury the truth inspired me to independently campaign, independently research, and then once I had some knowledge, campaign and share the truth with the rest of the world as much as possible. So that was my initial motivation. And then lo and behold, another thing I find is that anytime when you take a sincere path, of course, some obstacles will come, but also great opportunities arise. So here I am in the same university system, and I was like complaining to a friend, you know, he was like a Shiva Bhakta, and he was like covered, he's like Hawaii, there's this one Shiva Bhakta called, we just call him Shiva Doug, and he's like a Japanese American who like just loves Lord Shiva. He's a Babaji, lives in the forest. In Honolulu, they have all these Rudraksha forests behind the university. And so I used to associate with him a lot. And he's like, don't you know this university has the 3rd largest collection of Indian literature in the whole North American university system? And I'm like, you serious? And because I had my college credentials, I had full access to everything. And so then he brought me there to the Sinclair Library. And my understanding is when the University of Hawaii built the East-West Center, India at the time in the 1950s economically didn't have the funds to participate at the level required. So India said, okay, we'll give you thousands and thousands of books as our part of the donation. And this is what I was told. I haven't confirmed it. And so because of that, Honolulu University of Hawaii Sinclair Library has an incredible amount of Vedic literature from all these unknown scholars. And it was these scholars that actually clued me into my Vedic historical research that I've been doing now for almost 30 years, 26 years or something. And so, and it's a combination of influences, but walking into that library and finding this little pamphlet, this fat book by Swami this and Babaji this, and written in the 40s, written in the 30s, written in the 50s. And like, I felt like a you know, a gold mine prospector, you know, who suddenly struck pay dirt, you know, struck gold. And make it even more incredible, nobody else believes it's gold, you know. So I'm like, okay, I'll just take it all for myself, you know. And so that was a good example of how the attempt to bury the truth guided me to the truth, to the point that I'm sitting here right now speaking with all of you. And then since we're, you know, VFA is now based in Atlanta, and I was actually born there, and Krishna arranged, Destiny arranged the very first Vedic conference I ever attended. The first was in Atlanta, Georgia. That's where I first met Dr. David Frawley, Subhash Kak, Michael Cremo. I think Stephen Knapp was there. That was the first Vedic conference, and that's where we formed the organization World Association for Vedic Studies, WAVES. And yeah, so it was in Atlanta that I had my first recognition as actually a Vedic researcher. And I was amazed because after that experience with college, I dropped out. And next thing I know, within a year, less than a year of dropping out, I am at a scholar with world-leading PhDs and scholars in the fields of Vedic historical research and Indology. And I'm being treated as if I'm on the same level of them. I'm up there giving speeches, being applauded by them. I'm being congratulated on my points. And I went there, and if you read my first paper, it's actually a list of questions, more than me like pontificating as to what I believe. Because I looked at the roster and I'm like, whoa, these are big time people. And so that really clued me in, like, wow, Atlanta, my home birth. And then what's even more interesting is that when my mom first joined ISKCON was 1971, and I was 4 years old. We actually joined in Hawaii, but ISKCON at the time had a sensible policy. They said anyone who joins with kids needs to join the temple within their hometown, because it makes sense, you know, it's like a new movement. And so we actually moved all the way back from Kauai to Atlanta just to move into the temple. And so then my mom and her husband and the devotees would go out on Harinam chanting in the streets, and the police kept arresting the devotees, putting them in prison. And coincidentally, the mayor was Sam Massel, and he was my cousin. He was my my mother's uncle from my grandmother's side. And so then next thing I know, his own niece is getting arrested for, you know, whatever crime they were charged with, loitering. And so word got through, like, wow, your niece is in jail. He's like, what? For what? You know? And so they lied to him. They said, oh, this crazy new hippie cult. They're like, your daughter, your niece is in big danger. And it was those lies about the Krishna conscious movement that encouraged him to actually investigate, well, what the hell is this movement really? And then when he found out, oh, this is an authentic spiritual movement, he issued a declaration. He said the devotees are allowed to preach, proselytize, sing, dance in the streets of Atlanta, and no one shall ever bother them here from here on. You know, and that was my cousin, the mayor, Sam Massel. He's still alive there in Atlanta in his 90s now. And so basically, again, it was the lies and the misrepresentations of what ISKCON was that encouraged his investigation to discover what it really was. So again, the attempt to cover the truth invites the sincere seeker to realize what the truth really is. So that's a good example. And then let's see, we have, yes. Oh, yes, this is actually what led me to giving, this is the direct link to giving this speech here. So I was talking with, actually I took a 5-year hiatus from this Vedic historical research and activism. And then only about March this year, I got my website going again. It's brannonparker.com if anyone's interested. And so what I'm doing more than writing and actively researching is I'm rescuing the last 26 plus years of my research, of my articles, of my papers, of my books, and my contributions to various websites. Like, for example, the actual logo of VFA, I designed it with Sri Nandanandana, and the actual constitution, the mission statement, I wrote a lot of that. And I actually wrote Tulsi Gabbard's first appeal to the Hindu American community. And so what I'm doing is I'm rescuing all that. And of course, you know, I could seem like some middle-aged guy trying to trumpet my horn like I matter, but no, really, it's for posterity. And also I want, you know, the younger people, younger generations to know, you know, like the efforts we do, they're carried on by the future generations. And so, so what happened was, as I was researching and finding all my old articles, for about a year, I was editor of UK-based Hindu Today magazine. This was like 2013 to early 2014. And the magazine was actually going really well. And each edition, we were getting copies into the hands of each member of the British Parliament. And Arjun Vakadia, Anjan Vakadia, he was the owner. And I don't know if you guys know him, but Ganapa-ji knows him. And he's a great example of someone who, from the ground up, he was a Indian, Hindu, Ugandan refugee who had to flee Idi Amin, had nothing, came to England, and he built himself from the ground up to be a major industrialist. And he was like a dedicated devotee of Krishna. And he's just like, I need to do something to promote our culture. I need to give back, you know? So that's why he had that magazine. Then unfortunately, he had a heart attack, and that was pretty much the end of the magazine. So anyway, what happened is, so during my run as editor, I wrote an article about ancient Shiva and Krishna worship in China, or Shiva and Krishna worship in ancient China. And through this research, I basically proved undoubtedly that not only was Buddhism the national religion of China, there was a phase where direct Hinduism was the religion of China, right? And so I wrote this article, and it was a well-received article. And then literally a month later, after we published the article, the Hindu newspaper, which is Hindu in name only, as I'm sure most Hindus know, they took all the information from my article and actually sent their reporter to China and did their own expose on Hindu culture in China. And without, of course, crediting anyone on our side or crediting Hindu activism or crediting, you know, the Vedic conclusions. And they presented it as their own discovery, at the same time as minimizing it, because not once did they show the evidences of Chinese indigenous Hinduism. Like we have firmans, like imperial orders, where the emperor of China's ordering temples to Shiva to be built, you know? And we have like Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, when he builds, actually his son built the Victory Arch for where the Mongols, the exact route Genghis Khan first invaded China from. And you go there, there's a huge stone arch. And what is on top of it? What is the symbol of the great Khan dynasty? The Mongol dynasty is Garuda. And Garuda to this day is the city emblem of the capital city of Ulaanbaatar, the capital of Mongolia, right? So again and again, we find that this Vedic culture, of course, India is the world guru. Repeatedly, India sent out missionaries, like people who reinforce the path, reinforce the truth. But Vedic culture is verifiably indigenous to the whole universe, not just this planet. And so it's no accident that we'll find, you know, Genghis Khan's greatest symbol is Garuda, the eagle. And again, there's an eagle flying right ahead above me. So as we find, so the Hindu newspaper, they deleted all that evidence showing that the Chinese were practicing. And literally, they have ancient records saying they had Brahmin monasteries filled with thousands of Brahmins. And of course, some of them were Indian, right? And then even we know through the Bogar saint of the Murugan Kartikeya Skanda South Indian tradition, they directly have in their tradition, he went to China. And there's even some evidence that Lao Tzu, Taoism founder, was actually a South Indian saint. And so it wasn't taken up as some artificial imposition on China. It was accepted because the people recognized it as their own culture. So what happened, the Hindu took our information, presented it as their own, mundanified it, and they took all our evidences of, you know, images of Nrsingadev, Shiva Lingas, no, they didn't talk Lakshmi, Durga, etc. And then they just said, oh, this is just examples of Tamil merchants that were practicing their Hinduism there. But what's suspicious to me is not only were Nrsingadev, not only were Lord Shiva represented, they had carvings of Krishna stealing the garments of the gopis, carvings of Krishna lifting Govardhan Hill, carvings of Krishna with the cows and the coward boys in Vrindavan. So all these Vrindavan Leela at the center of ancient Chinese Vedic culture, right? And so again and again, as scholars know, this Vrindavan Leela is supposedly a newer invention into Hinduism. But if we look at all the evidence, we find actually Vrindavan Leela goes back. Krishna and Balaram, they're finding, like I just saw the other day, there's an ancient petroglyph in Madhya Pradesh. Is Krishna, Balaram, and Ekanamsha, another form of Subhadra, right? And it's about as old as, like about 3,000 years old, right? And so we're told that first there's the Aryans came, they made up this Vishnu worship, and then these tribal people made up this little Krishna and Vrindavan cow. No, but it's the opposite. Krishna worship looks to be like one of the oldest religious reflections in the archaeological record. Then again, that's a field I'm in right now, where again and again. So example, the Hindu intentionally never mentioned the Krishna Leela, ancient Chinese Krishna Leela inscriptions. So that triggers me to say, why are they ignoring Krishna? Well, it's undeniably there. It's not like someone artificially made this and it's a hoax. No, it's real, but they won't talk about it. So that triggers me. That clues me in to pursue that direction. And so another thing related to China was at one of the WAVES conferences at Dartmouth University, I met a Chinese professor and also introduced him to, I think he's BJP national chairman now, Ram Madhavji. And Ram Madhavji went and met him, and because I met him at WAVES and I actually interviewed him. And then Ram Madhavji met him in China, and the Chinese professor, he passed away now, he told Ram Madhav, he says, I am the last living Chinese Hindu, like that to him. And so when I interviewed him, he was telling me that he has been able to trace ancient Chinese Shiva and Vishnu worship in the ancient Chinese civilizational paradigm because of two things: the ancient incense trade routes, and there were Shiva, Vishnu temples all along those trade routes, according to the Chinese professor. Huang was his name. And the other big clue was Mao Zedong's intentional destruction of any and all Vedic evidence. As much as Vedic evidence as he could destroy, he did. He wanted to completely rip the Indic-Sino connection apart, try and decimate it, say it never existed. But that path of destruction clued that professor on to find more evidence for the Vedic foundations of Chinese culture. So again and again, we find this effort to minimize truth, to deflect from the truth, to hide the truth, actually can be a shining light to the truth seeker. But the problem is that in the world, especially today, the hectic world of today, even before this Corona era, people are too busy. People are too stressed out. People are like, okay, yeah, that's great, buddy, but hey, I gotta pay my bill. You know, I don't know if I have time to come to that lecture. I don't know if I have time, whatever I got. And the world is, people are so overwhelmed. So yeah, not many people can be active truth seekers. And I know all of us here who are with the VFA, we're made up of people like that, who are active truth seekers, who we had to step out of our comfort zones to pursue the truth. So that's the downside to all this. That's the negative side to this truth suppression, historical negationism, they call it, these efforts to destroy the light of truth. And so that's another reason Vaishnavas, devotees of God, are always called so merciful. And you think about the terminology, and it could seem from an outside perspective as, I can't remember the exact term, where you're overly glorifying someone, hagiography or something, where you're just making a normal person a saint and all this stuff. But no, when you think about they say the Vaishnavas are the most merciful, is because they actually step into these zones of discomfort and battle and debate and confrontation in order to dig out the gems of truth, polish them, and shine the light on the truth for the world to see, right? And it's a thankless task. It's totally thankless, you know? And then we'll have someone like Srila Prabhupada who came, but look, he was like, what, 69 years old, almost had died 2 times on the ship over here. $7, he came over here, spent a year alone, got robbed. You know, the very typewriter in his first manuscript of the Gita stolen. I mean, I would have a heart attack if that happened to me. Then you see, like, he just stuck it out, and he came here And just a brief 12 years, look at the impact he has on the world. And so, and I was young enough and old enough to remember him. And by his mercy, I can remember a lot of my experiences with Prabhupada as a child. He passed away when I was like 10 years old, better than I remember a lot of things from last week. And one thing I could say is a lot of devotees, they tend to present the King Prabhupada, the perfect, undoubting Prabhupada. But really part of his Leela was showing like, no, I'm in this world too, to show you the path of a devotee struggling in this world. And so that's why he has his Gita manuscript stolen, his typewriter stolen. That's why he gets stabbed by a cow. I don't know if you heard that lecture, and he's just like saying, what is this, Krishna? I'm doing this for you, and a cow stabs me. Well, and he was regretting taking sannyas and all that. And so all those are truths meant to show us, like even the pure devotee has those struggle. And so I remember as a kid, when Prabhupada would come around looking at the construction projects, and he would always be like, kind of, you know, put it in American terminology, kind of ticked off, you know, and he's like, what? I told you yesterday that cement company is not to be trusted. But Prabhupada, they're 10,000 rupees cheaper. No, and then the building falls apart. You know, I'd see Prabhupada like this, you know. And so that was mercy, you know, guiding and training these people, you know, like he was there daily, taking, even when he couldn't walk, they'd have him on his palanquin, taking tours of the Gurukul building under construction, making sure the pipes were set properly. And a lot of the time, from a mundane perspective, he looked like, you know, man, how many times I have to tell these guys, you know, when are they going to wake up? But for me, you know, I could, especially now as the years went by, I see that was a reflection of his mercy, his patience, his willingness to teach, even if people need to be taught again and again the same lessons. And that's Srila Prabhupada. And so it's so important to maintain the truth. And then, of course, you know, when we get into the esoteric leelas, you know, there'll be cases where Krishna will tell, you know, the devotee to lie, right? And but then we remember how Prabhupada repeatedly talks about how, you know, Krishna, sometimes he'll lie, but his devotees, he tells them, declare they will never perish. And so the ultimate point I'm making here is that the truth is always triumphant, and our duty as seekers of the truth, activists for the truth, is to do our part in this war against truth to allow other people access to the truth. And so important, and I'll close with this, is if we look at the pastime, the history, I should say, of Maharaj Parikshit, and confronting Kali Yuga personified as he's beating the bull of Dharma, broke 3 of those legs, and he's about to break the last leg of truth. Maharaj Parikshit stops him, and thus the leg of truth remains unbroken to this day. Yet, the Prabhupada directly says this in the purports to those verses. He says, yet the agents of Kali continually are attempting to destroy that same leg of truth through lying propaganda. They have not given up the battles. It's not like they're like, oh, well, we got 4 places where we could hang out. Maharaj Parikshit said, you know, we're fine with that. They're like, no, we need to destroy this truth. We need to destroy the last leg of Dharma. And if that last leg of Dharma were ever to be destroyed, then true Kali Yuga will set in. And perhaps it happened in past Kali Yugas. But even then, it's never destroyed ultimately. But for the human beings within the short lifespans we have, yes, we can suffer incredibly when we're denied access to the truth. And so as people in the line of protecting the truth, sharing the truth, revealing the truth, and enhancing the public's ability to access the truth, it is our obligation to stand up and continue this work, because it is a direct result of the efforts to destroy truth. We are actually a reflection of that, and we are standing up in defense of that truth. And for me personally, there's some of us who are more advanced, but I gotta say, I'm a proactive type. And so again and again, when I find the truth being attacked, that's when I'm like, no, I'm not accepting this. And I stand up to fight back. But the goal is to be proactive, right? And so I'm hoping with my lessons, because VJ knows my journey with VFA RSS has been tumultuous, right? Not negative, but tumultuous, right? Not always triumphant, right? But it's been tumultuous. And I want the truth of my journey to be known to the world at large. So younger people, they don't have to be reactive to like me. They can be proactive. And that's my humble wish to all of you. And I'm honored to be here. Namaste, Jai Shri Krishna, Satyameva Jayate.
Thank you. Wonderful, Vrindavanji. Thank you for the excellent lecture. And we have 20 more minutes, and we'll take some questions and comments that have been posted. But I just want to clarify to the audience when Vrindavanji told about the Hindu and Hindu Today. So he was the editor of Hindu Today magazine. The Hindu that he was talking was a newspaper, not a person or a religion. So just want to make people.
Oh yeah, good point.
So when he was saying the Hindu, he was saying that magazine was falsifying. Basically, it's a Marxist kind of newspaper, and wherever he was the editor of the Hindu Today.
Okay, yeah, based UK-based Hindu Today. And then just to be truthful, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. The history of the Hindu newspaper was founded by dedicated Hindu activists, but then it was stolen and railroaded in the wrong direction.
Okay, so
can I say real quick? I just wanted to say real quick, this is so important, is through all this, I have my feelings of like injustice. Like when I saw the Hindu doing that, I felt this is unjust, this is wrong, right? But then I saw it deeper and I was saying, no, now that the Hindu, a mainstream, secularly accepted newspaper, officially declares the presence of Hinduism undeniably in ancient China, that's a win for us.
Okay. I think Balabhadra Prabhu has a question.
Yes.
Prabhuji.
Haribo Vrindavan, what an ecstatic presentation. Your last point where you mentioned about your enthusiasm to protect the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever the ugly attempt to cut it down raises its head, you stand up. It reminded me of the Bhagavad Gita, Yada Yada Hi Dharmasya, Glani Bharata, Abhyutanam Tadatmanam Shrijamya. So Krishna says, wherever there's a decline in religious practice, O descendant of Bharat, and a predominant rise of your religion. At that time, I descend myself. So you're right in line with Krishna's enthusiasm.
Oh, thank you.
Taking a strong stand. So a question I have is about...
Can you switch on your video, Prabhu? Can you switch on your video?
I don't have much light in my room.
That's fine. That's fine.
I'm out of my station. I'm in Philadelphia. So the point about relative truth and transcendental eternal truth. Could you speak a little bit more specifically about relative truth and the transcendental eternal truth?
So when you say relative truth, you mean truths that's related to our time and circumstance?
Exactly. Yes.
So there's ultimate transcendental truths, like Krishna is the supreme personality of Godhead. And these are eternal and never waver. And fortunately, those eternal truths, they're present everywhere. It's not like that's only true in Goloka Vrindavan, right? And so that's a big part of my historical research, is finding the imprints, because I'm convinced that after Krishna was here on the planet, basically Radha, Krishna, and Balaram, and the Bhagavad Gita happened, the impact of that spread throughout the whole world. And that's actually the impetus for most God-centered religion in the modern age, the origins of it. And so that transcendental truth affects everything, all creation, everywhere. And then relative truths, correct me if I'm wrong, are things related to our current times and circumstances. And so, right, I could say, well, I'm born in an American body, so I'm an American in this phase, that type of thing. Right. And then I could, deny it, but then it wouldn't be very practical if I showed up, at the airport and I have no passport, no visa, and I try and say I'm a spirit soul. Look at the Bhagavad Gita right here. Even though it's the total absolute truth, it's not going to fly, right? And so, as representatives of our Gaudiya of the spiritual line, and hopefully representing the truth, we basically need to act within the society we're in and function at that level in order to serve the Lord properly. And could you give an example maybe of a relative truth that you had in mind?
Yeah, for instance, I at one point was 5 years old.
Yeah.
So someone can ask, well, how old are you? I'm 5 years, and now I'm 69, the Prabhupada year. So that truth, it was true. I was 5 years old, but it's relative to that time frame. Now things are, but like in the Gita when Krishna says, Chatur Varnyam, Mayashristami, he's saying 4 orders of life. And Prabhupada explains how you see the intellectual class, you see the worker class, you see the mercantile class. It's true because Krishna, God, says it. It's true. And it's true. Like you said it beautifully. It's a truth that crosses all boundaries of time, space, everything. Yeah. It affects everything in creation. So yeah, thank you so much. That was a great answer you gave.
Yeah. So and it's true, like you're talking about with the relative truth. It's like we need to use our God-given intelligence and our rational powers to figure out situations, So like if I'm like, oh, Balabhadra said he's 5 years old, and I'm like telling everyone, yeah, that 5-year-old devotee Balabhadra, it'd be like ridiculous, So so a good example within the pastimes too of like truth and situations, and is like, because there's this story of when in the Battle of Kurukshetra when they couldn't defeat Drona, and so then Krishna's like, okay, go kill that elephant named Ashvatthama. And Drona had his son Ashvatthama. It was like the reason of his existence was his love for his son. And so Krishna knew that was his Achilles heel, take out his son, and Drona's not going to fight anymore, and got rid of that danger to my devotees. And so so Yudhishthira just like, so Bhima kills the elephant Ashvatthama. Yudhishthira couldn't lie, And so he's like, Ashvatthama, and then Krishna knew he couldn't lie, so he blew his conch shell so nobody could hear him say the elephant. But then Drona only hears Ashvatthama's dead, right? And then Bhima does his dance, I killed Ashvatthama. and so then people who think Krishna is just some great Indian hero, and Yudhishthira was a great, emperor rather than great saintly God and great pure saints, they actually have this theory that because of Yudhishthira's lie, he never touched the ground before, his chariot never did, and after that lie, he had to touch the ground like every other sinful man. But actually, Prabhupada directly said it was his refusal to say what Krishna wanted that caused that demotion to say, per se. And so basically what is truth right there is an example. No, truth is what Krishna says it is, right? Truth, godliness is what God wants. And so that's like another esoteric understanding of the truth. And so then we look at the whole big picture of that incident. It's like, if Drona is leading up the demonic forces of untruth, no matter how noble of a soul he is, right? And if he's victorious, he's an impediment to the establishment of Dharma and truth, then truth will be defeated, will suffer a great defeat. And so this is a perfect example of how actually a so-called lie was actually the truth and the cause of the truth.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'll take some questions. We have 15 minutes, actually 10 minutes. There's a comment by Aarti Kaushal Chopra. She says, this is so crucial to teach our younger generation. And she also says, how can we do that, Brannon G?
Well, I touched on that a little bit. I think it's so important to not hide the human side of our great leaders, both spiritual, ancestral. It's like so important, whether it's Shivaji, the great Maratha ruler, or Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, or Srila Prabhupada, or any Jesus Christ, You know, it's like, because some Christians even, they can't handle like when Christ's on the cross, it seems like he's doubting, oh, what have you done to me? And they like, there was even a breakaway sect of Christianity that tried to use that as proof that Jesus was just a confused guy like the rest of us. And so I think it's so important that we don't hide this side of our great spiritual luminaries. You know, give the whole picture. You know, they follow their footsteps. Don't imitate, obviously, but follow the footsteps that they guided us. Because I would say, in my own path as someone who grew up with Srila Prabhupada directly, you know, attending his lectures, direct information from his lips to my ears, right? I was burdened by this concept that he was so great, and, you know, and he never, everything that happened, he knew before it was going to happen and all this. I don't believe in that. I believe the reason, you know, Prabhupada comes here in a human form, despite being totally pure, was to remind us that we also as humans can be perfect. We can reach our true soul identities also, with all our weaknesses, with our foibles. And we just need to have that confidence.
Okay, and she also says, how do we make these teachings exciting and relevant and compelling to the youngsters, especially who are more atheist than ever before?
Yeah, that's something I always was into in the past. Was I found that the, you know, Western expression, stealing the thunder, you know, that expression, where basically it means like the glory, what shines about something, the bling or whatever, right, of an issue or a personality, like, is so like modern society, Kali Yuga's expert at stealing the thunder of all of art and beauty. And so like a good example, like I got back into Twitter after like 10 years not being there, and someone was talking about not, you know, quoting the Vedas and saying you should never touch your feet to a Brahmin or whatever. And so like I've had Thai massage in America, and you go in and there's Buddhist mantras. It's very spiritual healing experience. And so I just shared like, oh yeah, well, that, I guess that rules out Thai massage. And all the Hindus are like, oh, they thought it was like some sexual comment. And so I was like all confused for a second. And then I realized it's the context of it, right? And so what happens is healing massage can be very healing and spiritual, but our mundane world has turned it into this low-grade, sense gratifying thing. They've taken music and art and they've turned it into like, you know, egoistic mania, sex crazed mindset, right? They've taken the most beautiful recipes and they like will take like famous Desi recipes and they'll like make beef curry out of it, you know? And then a beautiful example will be is I studied Bollywood, right? What is the origins and the first successes of all Bollywood movies, songs, is they stole all the traditional indigenous songs of the native Hindu people, the villages, the tribal songs, a lot of Brijbasi songs, and they mundanified it. They like stole the thunder of your ancient indigenous culture and turned it into a hedonistic moneymaker, right? And so in short, I'll answer your question. Basically, we need to find strategies that return the thunder, the light, the glory, and the mystery to our stories, our legends. And there's been some attempts, but we need to start having like, you know, hard-hitting, easily understood, clear-cut 3-minute videos, like bam, 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 you know, something like that, or little pamphlets, bam, 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 or, you know, just something anyone third grade level can read it, get it, right? We need to stop forcing people to first develop an interest before they can understand it. And that's our huge problem, is we're so focused on being accurate that a lot of laymen or children or whatever, they don't have the wherewithal to understand what we're talking about. And so that's a huge challenge. And actually, I'll send it to you, Vijay, from 2005 at one of these conferences we used to go to. I made a point by point proposal how to reach the young people, you know, and I'll send it to you and you can forward it to our questioner. And if anyone
I will.
follows this, we will succeed.
Okay, sure. I will pass it on to our group. And I think Aarti Kaushal Chopra is part of our group. And there's a comment by Elijah Dopkin. She says, yes, Krishna was once sick and couldn't feel satisfied until a submissive devotee would put his feet on his head.
Yeah, exactly.
And
I love that story. And then, yeah, not only that, they're like Narada Muni's like telling the gopis, like, don't you know, because the Brahmins refused. They said, oh no, we'll go to hell if we do that. And then the gopis are like not even questioning. And Narada's like, wait, don't you know you'll probably go to hell for giving your foot dust to Krishna? And they're like, oh man, I'm ready to go to hell as long as this headache goes away. So that's where we're at. That's our line.
Okay. So there's one more, we have 5 more minutes, and RTG says, wow, Chinese Hindus, fascinating. So I think RTG may not be knowing, I mean, they're Arab Hindus, Vedic people, Hindus or Vedic people. So they're Vedic or Hindu people in every country, every possible places, even in Muslim countries, but they're all hidden. So I practically experienced hidden Hindus in Turkey. So anyway, it's not my day to tell. So I leave it to Vrin.
Oh, you were in Turkey?
Hindus in different countries, that's what they want to know.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I was in Turkey recently and I found Govinda's in the Gauranga Yoga studio. And that's a really important point actually, is because not only do we need to find better strategies to respond to the natural interests of especially Hindu youth, because it's like scratch the surface, you know, and it's there. And Prabhupada actually used to point out, and it's actually changed because of Prabhupada. But back in the 50s and 60s, Prabhupada, he said, the Indian people are 1 footstep away from Krishna, but they're running 10 steps away from him. And he said the Westerners are like 100 steps away from Krishna, but they're taking 1 step toward him, you know? And so the truth is naturally one of the reasons India and Hindu civilization is such a it's the primary target of Kali Yuga, is to destroy India and Vedic Hindu civilization. And the reason is because it's so close to your people, right? And they need to deflect you, they need to distract you. And so, yes, we have been deficient as a community in figuring out how to reach people who are not actively interested, right? And so, and then the other point is, say the Muslim countries, anywhere in the world, is finding ways to naturally attract them in ways that do not bring up their defenses, in ways that they're already interested. And so Pakistan, for example, I've been there twice and recently. And as we know, in Indus Valley civilization, Mohenjo-daro, Harappan, right? And they're all brainwashed to not even know the glory of their own ancestors. And for example, after World War II, right? The man in charge, I wish I could remember his name, and this is another fact that I saw 20 years ago and I haven't been able to rediscover. I found it in that university in Hawaii, and this is pre-internet, so I couldn't just email it to someone. He said, now I've been given this task to rebuild the cities of Europe, or at least London or England. And he said, the truth is, the greatest template we could use in the history of the world is the Harappan Indus Valley civilization. He said, even to this day, no civilization has been able to replicate the city planning and waterworks of the ancient Indus Valley people, right? And he's saying, if we want to rebuild Europe properly, we should follow the architectural plans of the Harappan, Mohenjo-daro, Indus civilization people. And so who are these people in Pakistan? They are direct descendants of these people, right? Yet only now they're starting to develop a sense of historic pride, right? But for a long time it was shameful, you know. It's like, oh my God, that's pre-Mohammed. We can't even recognize that, you know. And so I feel that people like us should harness, because there are scholars there are intelligent people there. We need to harness that interest and say, hey, forget about the religious ethnic issues. These Harappan people knew how to build cities. Our cities today are hellholes. Let's work together to harness the wisdom, the skill of our ancestors. And who could say no to that? Really?
That's true. Thank you very much, Vrindavanji. We have just one more minute. RTG, we are going to plan some program for youth. And if you know youth that you have, we will definitely cater for the youth. We'll bring up some programs targeting to the youth. So any comments? Anybody has a question? Otherwise, Prabhuji, any closing comments from your side before we sign off?
Okay. I want to thank Vrindavan Prabhu for, enlightening everyone here with his enthusiasm for the culture. That's the most important thing.
Thank you.
Krishna blesses us with that enthusiasm along with the message. So you did a wonderful job, and I'm proud to be in VFA with you. Okay.
Jai.
Thank you so much.
It's really great.
Thank you very much, Vrindavanji. Any final comment before I stop the recording?
Yes. So I'm really honored to be back on the saddle with you guys again. And I look forward to more interactions. And again and again, we find that the truth is there for us. And our duty is to translate that truth based on time and circumstances. And because Balabhadra ji, you mentioned the Chatur Varna Maya Shreshta, the 4 Varnas, divisions of society. And I want to close with an important statement. Basically, as we know, this casteism issue has been used as a bludgeon against Vedic Hindu society for centuries now. But the fact is this Varnashram Dharma, if implemented properly, can and will save the world. How? Basically, everyone's stressed out. Everyone does, most people have no sense of validation, no sense of belonging. And the reason is because each human being, no matter who they are, no matter what race, even if they're handicapped, is born with a natural talent. Ancient Vedic society naturally harnessed the talent that is inborn within each new baby. They would monitor that child and see what is their natural talent, what is their natural expertise, and then they would apprenticeship them with that right person. So if they're really expert at making flutes, they would be apprenticed to the flute maker, right? So the duty of government is to find out the natural inborn expertise of each individual as they're a child, and then guide them in that direction. And then every human being who is fulfilled at their natural expertise, they're doing work that they're naturally good at, will have a sense of natural accomplishment, will be a positive member of society. There will be no drug abuse, domestic violence, all that will be minimized almost to nil. And that's the huge crucial problem with the world right now. Everyone has a talent, but very few are being recognized for their natural talent. And so they might be expert at cooking, but there they are, in the car factory making cars every day. So they feel useless. So that's the big key, is to finding out who we are, what is our true natural tendencies, where we stand within that system, and establishing a governance system that harnesses the natural potential of each individual. And once we do that, we can establish a Vedic society once again.
Thank you. Dhanyavad. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for participating.
Thank you, everyone. Namaskar.